This anime was opened by showing a city in Japan and a teenager who was daydreaming on a city bus. But before the railroad tracks, the brakes on the bus he was traveling on failed, and an accident killed many victims, including that teenager named Amakawa Haruto. Sometime after that incident, Haruto woke up again in an old hut. His body was shabby, and his body turned back into a small child with a messy appearance. Haruto, still confused by what was going on, leaned against the room's wall. His memory was vaguely jumbled, and there were many things he didn't understand. Not long after, 3 adult men came carrying a brown sack and called Haruto Ryo. After putting down the sack they brought, the 3 people ate at the table. Meanwhile, Ryo, who was starving, was told to shower and went out because of his strong body odor. After a shower, Ryo squatted in the yard and ate the fruits he found there. Ryo was still thinking about the memory that suddenly appeared in his head about a 20-year-old boy named Haruto, and also about the traffic accident that killed him. That confused Ryo, and he did not understand what was happening. But other memories said he was in the slum area to avenge his mother, who died in a murder tragedy. Ryo, who was sad when he remembered his mother, was suddenly visited by 4 strangers he didn't recognize. Their clothes looked so nice and clean too. The people were asking about a little girl with purple hair, but because Ryo never saw her, Ryo couldn't say anything. All he knew was the slums that stretched ahead. Hearing that one of them came forward, she was named Celia Claire. Celia took out magic and used it to find the whereabouts of the person she was looking for. But at the same time, something happened that surprised Celia. She felt a large amount of magic enveloping Ryo's body. Ryo himself suddenly could see a strange aura emitting from his body. After feeling he was helpful enough, Celia gave a bag of money to Ryo and left to continue the search. Right after Celia and her group left, Ryo tried to open the pouch, but what was inside surprised Ryo. The bag contained several large silver coins. Ryo, who didn't want other people to see the money, finally ran and hid it under his shirt. But when he got home, Ryo's chest was stabbed by someone. Luckily, the knife stabbed into Ryo's chest was stopped by the silver coins Celia had given earlier. Not long after, time suddenly stopped. Along with it, a strange spirit appeared in the form of a girl with pink hair. The spirit was named Ishia, and she approached Ryo to tell her how to use magic. Finally, Ryo used his magic to beat the person who stabbed him earlier. After the fight ended, Ryo saw that the 3 adults with him had died from stabbing. At the same time, Ryo also heard a mysterious crying sound coming from inside a brown necklace in the corner of the room. The sack contained a little girl named Flora Beltram. Flora asked Ryo to take her back to the palace, but when Flora saw the people who had died there, Flora fainted again. Ryo, who still didn't know what had happened, finally carried Flora out and intended to take her back to the palace. But on the way, he again met Celia and her group. Instead of thanking him, one of them ran up to Ryo and slapped him in the face instead. The girl's name was Christina Beltram, sister of Flora. Christina accused Ryo of kidnapping her sister, so there was a long debate between them. After his condition improved, Vanessa Emerald asked Ryo to come with them back to the palace. Arriving at the palace, Ryo's hands were tied, and his body was hanged and beaten like a criminal. Ryo was interrogated and forced to admit that he was involved in the kidnapping. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Flora, who had previously fainted, had now regained consciousness. In her room, Flora asked where Ryo was and asked Vanessa to call him. Then Vanessa and Celia returned to the place used to interrogate Ryo. But when they got there, they were shocked because Ryo's body was covered with wounds, and Ryo fainted. After being sent down, Celia finally took Ryo and underwent treatment in the palace. Celia told Ryo that he had to meet the king because the king wanted to thank Ryo in person. A few days after that incident, Ryo came to see the king and his entire family. Ryo got a scholarship to study at the Beltram Kingdom Academy as a reward for saving the princess. But since Ryo still couldn't read and write, Celia helped Ryo to teach him personally. But when Ryo started working on the questions given, Celia was surprised because all the answers that Ryo wrote had no mistakes, and even Ryo himself said that the questions were so simple. He could remember everything because, in fact, in Ryo's previous life, he was a student at a university in Japan. The next day during sword lessons, Ryo was asked by the coach to attack his body, and this surprised the other students, especially the sword style that Ryo showed they had never seen before. Even later, Ryo, who took the school exam, made all the students fall into an uproar because his grades were perfect, and his position was on the same level as Christina, the princess. Then moving on 5 years since Ryo came to the Beltram Kingdom and studied there, Rio was selected to be one of the 3 people representing the elementary school division to participate in the tournament between the kingdom's knights. But Rio's being chosen made the other students from noble families not want to accept him. Because to all of them, no matter the circumstances, Rio was just a commoner and didn't deserve that honor. But the coach said the king had determined the decision, so they had to accept it, like it or not. Celia said that if Rio's results were good in the tournament, then it was very likely that Rio would be recruited to become a knight even before graduation day. But Rio himself denied it. Rio told Celia that he didn't want to become a knight. He wanted to become a wanderer and went to an eastern area called Yagumo, where his parents were born. The next day, the tournament between royal knights started. Unexpectedly, the person who became Rio's opponent was a knight captain who had once tortured and interrogated him. His name was Charles Arbor. Finally, Rio won the match with an unusual sword style. Charles, frustrated because of his defeat, tried to cheer himself up by drinking and getting drunk with one of the royal nobles, Rhys Vulp. Charles told Rhys that the child who had beaten him was suspected of being involved in the kidnapping of Princess Flora 5 years ago. This made Rhys remember the incident in a slum village that failed his plan. In Beltram Royal Academy Elementary School, the students would be doing their exploring practice in the forest. Because Rio was deemed useless, he was only told to carry the luggage of the other students. Finally, the students began to enter the forest and were involved in a dangerous situation. In a battle against monsters, one student, Stuart Huguenot, was injured. His body swayed and crashed into Flora until Flora finally fell into the abyss. Luckily, Rio, who saw the incident, rushed to help her. Finally, Rio managed to throw Flora back over the cliff. At the same time, he fell to the bottom of the abyss. But even so, Rio was saved thanks to the wind magic he used just before his small body hit the ground. On the other hand, the students defeated the monsters that attacked them. Christina asked who had pushed Flora so that she fell off the cliff, but Stuart had an alibi that he was a victim. Rio, who happened to have returned to the top of the cliff, heard their commotion. That made Rio think he could no longer survive in the Beltram Kingdom, because at this time his position had been slandered and considered as someone who had harmed the king's daughter. For that, Rio decided to leave the kingdom and started his journey to a land called Yagumo. He would return to the place where his parents were born. In the afternoon, in the palace, Celia, walking down the hall, suddenly heard a conversation taking place in the king's room. One of the noble Huguenot families carried out the conversation and asked King Garcia not to reveal the culprit in the incident where Flora fell into the abyss to the public, because if that were done, it would worsen the family's image and caused instability within the Beltram Kingdom. So the only way to prevent that, they could only make Rio a suspect in the case of the Fell of Flora tragedy. That night, Celia, who was worried, was visited by Rio. Rio apologized and explained what had happened. Besides that, he also told Celia that he would leave the kingdom and continued his journey to Yagumo. Rio promised that on his way, he would always send letters but with a different name, Haruto.
Haruto.
Then 3 days after Rio left the Beltram Kingdom, Rio arrived at a kingdom called Galark. While Rio was walking around looking for groceries in the market, he came across a shop selling pasta and cooked dishes. Even the shop called the food they sold by the name of noodles. Rio, who heard that name, was immediately surprised. Even when Rio tried to eat it, he started to remember the city called Tokyo. After eating the noodles, Rio asked for a place where he could get those noodles in dry form as he needed them for provisions on the trip. Hearing this, the seller finally informed and directed Rio to go to a large shop managed by Liselot Cretia. Arriving at the shop in question, Rio was met by a waitress named Lot, and he saw that all the ingredients sold in that place were very similar to the food sold in Tokyo. Even arranging the goods for sale was very similar to mini-markets in general. Rio was invited around by Lot. Finally, Rio bought 15 kilograms of dry noodles and their seasonings. Apart from that, Rio also asked Lot to deliver his letter, which was for Celia in Beltram's kingdom. After all those transactions were completed, Rio continued his journey toward Yagumo. However, his steps stopped when he was attacked by a beastkin named Latifa. The battle ended after Rio managed to defeat Latifa and remove the slave collar that was around her neck. Latifa said that she was assigned to kill Rio by someone named Stuart Huguenot. Feeling sorry, Rio finally decided to take Latifa, especially since Rio's direction of travel would pass through an area inhabited by Aegean, half-human, half-beast creatures. Rio himself was planning to leave her in that area. Sometime after traveling with Latifa and the time was approaching evening, Rio decided to rest and set up camp in the middle of the forest. Then when Rio was cooking for Latifa, Rio was surprised because Latifa called it spaghetti. Especially when Latifa was sleeping, Latifa was delirious and talked about her family in Tokyo. That made Rio even more confident that Latifa was also like him, who was incarnated in the same era. While Latifa was already drifting off to sleep, suddenly, a group of Ajin visited where they were camping and thought Rio had kidnapped one of their relatives, Latifa, a half-human, half-animal creature. So there was a fight between them. Rio, who had no intention of fighting from the start, was finally defeated and brought to the residence of the Ajin. After realizing from fainting, Rio was approached by Latifa, who had told the Ajin that there was a misunderstanding between them because Rio was the human who had freed Latifa from the slavery necklace. Not long after, one of the Ajin leaders came from the beastkin race named Ursula. Ursula apologized for all the misunderstandings and asked Rio to attend a meeting of village elders who would make a formal apology. Hearing that, finally, the Ajin who had attacked Rio too bowed down and apologized for the treatment they had given. They were named Orphea, Seirei, Uzuma, and also Alma. It then moved on to the next day, when Ursula took Rio to attend a meeting of village elders. Rio had asked about the world tree in the middle of the forest, which surprised Ursula because, according to her, if someone didn't have high knowledge about spirits, they wouldn't be able to see it. After talking for quite a while, they finally arrived at the meeting place. They were already waiting for the other chiefs who belonged to different races. She was Sildora from the High Elf race and Dominic from the Dwarf race. Sildora said that remembering the misunderstanding that had occurred, they, as leaders, apologized to Rio and thanked him for freeing one of their relatives who became human slaves. Besides that, because they came from different races, Ajin expected a request from Rio in return for what he had done. Hearing that, Rio finally asked the elders to take care of Latifa and allowed her to stay there. But because right now Latifa was very attached to Rio, he needed time to get Latifa used to live in that village. Shortly after saying that, a spirit suddenly appeared who became the forest protector in the Ajin's territory. Her name was Dryas. Dryas, who had just appeared, suddenly approached Rio and said that she felt the presence of a spirit inside Rio's body. According to her, the spirit had a human form, meaning it was in the highest spirit class. She felt the spirit inside Rio's body was higher than Dryas, but the spirit was sleeping because of something Dryas herself didn't understand. Dryas said that 1,000 years ago, the spirits in human form were lost in the war of the gods against the demons, and they were called the Six Great Spirits. After the meeting, Rio was invited by Orphea to visit a house that he would use as a residence in the territory of the Ajin. Because according to Rio, he needed around 1 year to get Latifa used to live there before finally moving on. Then 1 year passed since Rio and Latifa came to Ajin village. Rio had the honor of being their best friend, whereas Latifa would be officially made a part of the villagers. To celebrate it all, they would make a festival. At night when the festival was held, Rio took Latifa into the forest to talk and told her that Rio would leave Latifa in the village. The scene then shifted to Reese and a servant flying up the griffin. They would take the eggs to a place made by Wereform's nest. After getting one of the eggs, Reese left his servant in the middle of the forest alone. But the incident was known by the Ajin, who immediately gave chase to Ria's servant, and unexpectedly, a group of wyverns chasing their eggs came and started rampaging around the forest. Luckily, Rio, who was around the location, rushed to help the Ajin, defeated the wyvern leader, and drove out the rest. The following day, Rio continued the conversation with Latifa that had been delayed. Latifa finally told him that she was a person who had died and incarnated in this era. Before her death, Latifa lived in a country called Japan. Latifa died in an accident between the bus she was traveling on and a train passing through the middle of Tokyo. Finally, Rio said that he also experienced the same incident as Latifa. He died in a bus accident in Tokyo. After that long talk, the time for Rio to continue his journey finally arrived. Rio was given weapons made by the dwarves, space-time storage artifacts by the chief elf, and food supplies from the beastkin. Then moved on 2 years since Rio left the village of the Ajin. Rio finally arrived at Yagumo, the birthplace of his parents and the black-haired human race. Rio asked one of the original residents about the village head's residence until he was finally escorted by 2 girls named Ruri and Sayo because the village head was Ruri's grandmother. Arriving at Ruri's house, they were greeted by the head of the village named Yuba. Even though she commented on Rio's strange way of dressing, Yuba accepted him. Rio said he was looking for the origin of his parents, who came from Yagumo 15 years ago. They were named Zen and I Am. Upon hearing the two names, a shocked Yuba told Ruri and Sayo to leave the two of them alone. After the two girls left, Yuba asked Ryo to continue his story in even more detail. Finally, Yuba said she recognized the two parents who were none other than her son Zen. In other words, Yuba was Ryo's grandmother.
Mother.
The next morning, after a night's rest, Ryo came to the kitchen to meet Yuba and said he would help prepare breakfast. Apart from that, while he lived there, he would also help with village work. After cooking and preparing food, Sayo went to breakfast with her brother. Then after breakfast, Yuba asked Sayo's brother, Shin, to take Ryo to meet Sora and taught him how to hunt. After hunting, Ryo returned to Yuba's residence, but seeing his dirty body, Ryo thought he should take a bath and created his bathroom in the courtyard using spirit techniques. But Ruri and Sayo, who saw a strange building, suddenly appeared in the yard to find out what was going on and found Ryo, who had just come out of there. Besides that, Shin and his two friends had also arrived, so some rough exchanges ensued. Then moving on, after being with Yagumo for quite a while and doing village work, Ryo was asked by Yuba to escort them when they were selling agricultural produce to the kingdom's territory. Not long after, several people were heard running and screaming that the villagers were fighting. They were Shin and a man named Gon, one of the village head's sons from a neighboring village. Their fight broke out because Shin caught Gon entering the bathroom where his sister and Ruri cleaned themselves. The fight was stopped by Yuba, who immediately asked the purpose of Gon's arrival to their village. Gon said they were on their way to the capital, but their cart broke down. They decided to come to the village and asked for a place to spend the night. After Gon and his friends left, Shin asked Yuba to allow his sister to stay in the house for a while. Shin was worried about Gon being there, especially since they had only been alone so far. That night, right before going to sleep, Ryo met Ruri and Sayo to give them an artifact and then asked them to put it in the corner of the room. And without any suspicion whatsoever, they finally agreed. The night passed early in the morning. Accompanied by Yuba, Ryo helped take care of the crops and separated them into 3 parts. The first was for consumption by the villagers, the second was for taxes, and the rest would be sold to the city. During their activities, Yuba was suddenly visited by someone named Saga Hayat, a tax officer from the kingdom. After a day of checking the residents' crops, Hayat would stay in the village overnight before continuing his work the next day. But in the middle of the night, Gon and his group suddenly came to Yuba's residence and tried to attack Ruri. Luckily, that incident was known by Ryo through the artifact he gave before. Finally, Ryo beat Gon mercilessly. Hayat stopped the beating because he saw Gon's very worrying condition. Hayat said that what Gon had done was a big crime. They will be imprisoned in the royal capital in exchange for the crime. The next day, the royal guards came. After getting information from Hayat, they would bring Gon and his group to the capital. In addition, they would also go with the residents who would sell their crops there. Before the officers left the tax, Yuba sent a letter to Hayat's father. Arriving in the capital, Ryo and Sayo, who at that time was looking for spices at the market, stopped by a place that sold souvenirs and accessories. Later, Ryo bought a hair clip and gave it to Sayo as a gift from him. That made Sayo felt very happy. On the other hand, Hayat, who had arrived in the capital by this time, came to meet his father and gave him the letter that Yuba entrusted. Hayat's father, Saga Goki, read the letter's contents, and he was shocked. Then moving on to Ryo, who had just arrived at the inn visited by Hayat and his parents. After getting to know each other, Goki told Ryo that he and his wife used to serve Karasuki I Am, the mother of Ryo, who was none other than the princess of the Karasuki royal family. Besides that, Goki also told everything he knew about Zen, Ryo's father. After he told his story, Goki said he invited Ryo to the palace to meet the rest of his family. The next day, accompanied by Goki, Ryo came to the palace and faced the queen and the king, who were none other than his grandparents. There was a conversation between them about the life story of Ryo's parents. Finally, Ryo mentioned that he was on his way to avenge his mother, who was killed by someone named Lucius Orgale. Hearing this, the king named Karasuki Homura said that he could understand Ryo's feelings. For that, he certainly could not prevent it. However, Homura wanted to confirm his grandson's ability by having him compete against Goki, who had been known as an unrivaled samurai. Finally, Goki was defeated by Ryo. Then moving to the Yuba residence after Ryo's return from the capital, Ryo told Ruri that he was her cousin and the prince of Karasuki Kingdom. This surprised Ruri. The conversation that night ended with Ryo saying that he would stay in the village for the next year or so. During that year, time continued to pass. Ryo learned many things and helped the residents with new knowledge that he brought from a neighboring kingdom. One day in the rice fields, Ryo approached Sayo, who was planting rice. Ryo felt that day was the right day to tell Sayo that his departure from the village would be after the harvest season. That made Sayo feel very sad, but Sayo realized she could do nothing to prevent Ryo from leaving. In the evening, Sayo brought her sadness home, and Shin, her older brother, discovered it. Time flew, and the days went by so fast. Finally, the harvest season had arrived, indicating that Ryo only had a few days left to stay in the village. On the same day, Sayo met Ryo and asked him to talk privately. There Sayo expressed her feelings. After listening to the sentence, Ryo was surprised but said he could not repay Sayo's love. That made Sayo felt very sad again. The next morning when the sun had not yet risen from the horizon, Ryo was already preparing to leave the village. He said goodbye to Ruri and Yuba, who sent him off to the courtyard. Meanwhile, at the village entrance, Sayo stood alone, waiting for Ryo to come through that place. When Ryo came, they were involved in a little conversation before Ryo finally said goodbye to continue his journey. Then it moved 1 year since Ryo left Yagumo village. Ryo finally returned to the Ajin village and was warmly welcomed by Latifa and the other beastkin. Ryo told the elders about the journey he had been on and the answers to all the questions he had been looking for in Yagumo village. Apart from that, this time, Ryo also could only stay for a short time at Ajin's village because he had to return to Beltrum to meet someone immediately. The next morning, when Ryo woke up from a night's rest, he was surprised by the appearance of a naked woman sleeping beside him. It created a furor in the whole house. After the situation improved, the girl told him she was a spirit and the rest she didn't remember anything. Since she currently didn't have a name, the girl asked Ryo to come up with a name. He gave her the name Aishia. Because he didn't get any further explanation, Ryo finally brought Aishia to meet the elders. However, in the middle of their conversation, Dryas came over because she felt the powerful spirit energy rising in her protected area. After getting acquainted with Aishia, Dryas said that Aishia was a spirit she didn't know about. So to find out more, Dryas would ask about elements Aishia could use. But the answer surprised Dryas and the people who were there. Aishia could use all kinds of elements, and to prove it, Dryas brought them near the world tree and let Aishia fight with Ryo. Dryas stopped the fight because she worried that the strength of the two fighting creatures would destroy the entire village. After the trial battle, time continued to go so fast, and it came to the time when Ryo was about to depart again. Before leaving, the elders gave Ryo a teleportation crystal so he could return to the village quickly. This time Ryo planned to return to Beltrum to meet Cilia, the teacher who had been credited with teaching him many things when he first lived in the palace. Arriving at the Beltrum's kingdom, Ryo changed his hair color using an artifact given to him by an elder in Ajin village. Ryo said that he would infiltrate the academy to meet Cilia there. At night, with the help of Aishia, Ryo finally managed to enter the academy and arrived at the room where Cilia used to be. But when he found it, Ryo didn't meet anyone. Even the books that Cilia used to study weren't there either. Knowing this, Ryo asked Aishia's help to find someone who could tell Cilia's whereabouts and extracted information from him by hypnotizing that person. Until finally, they found one person and started asking many things. That person said Cilia was in the royal palace waiting for her wedding ceremony with Charles Arbor, which would take place tomorrow morning. After hearing that, Ryo, surprised, quickly decided to infiltrate the palace and asked Cilia herself what had happened. Using Aishia's abilities, Ryo infiltrated the palace easily and met Cilia in her room. Surprised by the sudden meeting, Cilia reflexively approached and hugged Ryo with all her might. They engaged in a little conversation and reminisced about the past. In the middle of their conversation, Ryo asked about the truth of Cilia's marriage to Charles. Because according to Ryo himself, Charles was not a good nobleman, so they both knew Charles' attitude. Even when he was little, Ryo was tortured by Charles and forced to confess as part of the people involved in kidnapping the king's daughter, Flora. But the answer that came out of Cilia's mouth made Ryo still not understand the situation. Even Cilia said something so that Ryo could leave immediately. Outside, Ryo, who couldn't accept the situation, spoke to Aishia. He said that he would find out more about the reasons behind Cilia and Charles' marriage. Then came the day when Cilia and Charles' wedding would take place. But before that could happen, Cilia was visited by Charles' 6 other wives. They talked about their status when Cilia became Charles' 7th wife. Luckily, Christina came to a stop to the painful conversation. After Charles' wives left, Christina and Cilia talked about Flora leaving the palace with several nobles from the Huguenot family. After the conversation, Charles took Cilia using a golden carriage to surround the city. But when the group arrived in front of the church, the guards were surprised by an attack that came from someone. That person was Rio. Rio attacked the entire troops and also stepped on Charles' body until Charles could not move. Besides, a man embraced Cilia's petite body and pointed a knife toward her neck. Through telepathy, Rio told Cilia that he was acting to take Cilia away from that place. But before taking her, Rio wanted to ask one more time about Cilia's desire, what she really wanted. Besides that, Rio also knew that Cilia's family was receiving threats from the Arbor nobles. For that reason, if Rio kidnapped Cilia, then her family would not be blamed for the incident. The process of kidnapping Cilia did not go smoothly. Rio often had to deal with the troops and was attacked using the magic of the royal troops. Luckily assisted by Asia, Rio managed to bring Cilia away from the Beltram kingdom without getting hurt. After their position was safe from the pursuit of the royal troops, Rio said that he would take Cilia on an adventure. But at the same time, suddenly, something surprising happened. Several bright lights could be seen appearing from the sky in various places. That made Asia said, "Please help them." The scene then switched. The lights that fell from the sky earlier brought several people who came from Japan. It was the same city and year as Haruto when he died in an accident. One of the people who teleported was named Ayase Miharu, Ryo's childhood friend and the person he loved the most in his previous life. The end. Thank you to those who have watched the video until the end. See you in the next video. Remember to like this video if you like and subscribe.